Greetings, comrades, and welcome to another episode of the Postmodern Polymaths Podcast. I'm the bearded one, Chris Watson, and next to me, virtually, is Lyman Smith. How you doing, Lyman?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Teeth worked on. Got temporary crowns. Only paid. Well, this part's about 2,000 grand. 2,000 grand. 2 grand, and the other half's going to be 2 grand. Oh, and I still have fucked up teeth on the bottom. So my mouth is probably worth more in work than a new car. So
I dislocated my finger yesterday morning.
yeah, so just cut it off because they're not going to fucking go. You can't go to the hospital. You might as well just cut the fucking thing off.
This is America.
Yeah, it's America. We don't have time for that shit. Okay. Anyway, so uh, I wanted to introduce. This is kind of a, and I don't want to gush too much, but this is kind of a big deal one for me. I don't usually have authors on, especially people I've read. So I want to introduce to everybody to. He's a professor of sociology at Brooklyn College and the author of The End of Policing. If you help me in welcoming Alex Vitale, did I get that right?
Yes.
All right.
And I went to the dentist today myself.
Oh no. How'd that go for you?
Clean bill of health, though.
Well, you're fortunate because that's definitely not. My teeth have been fucking up for the last 10 years, probably. A combination of genetics and lack of care. It's not a good combination there. Thanks for thanks for coming on. First of all,
You bet.
Also, you mentioned you like beer. I will tell everybody that I'm drinking currently. What do I got? Rogue Cherry Choctabulous. See if you can see that.
I like the arrogant bastard.
Oh Lord, that
Yes.
shit'll kill you.
Yes.
That shit, ow! It is. It's just like angry. It hits you. It's like ow. Take that, motherfucker. You know, it's just angry.
I'm pinkies out tonight with some $2 chuck at Trader Joe's.
Oh Jesus, Trader Joe's.
Listen,
Where's your beard, hipster? Shit. Anyway, so yeah, I'm an imperial stout kind of guy, and you said you've had a couple beers on occasion, Mr. Vitale. Is that true?
One of the nice things about traveling around so much the last few years is getting to drink the local brews around the country. And actually was in Portland last fall and was really impressed with the beer scene there and the food scene and the political scene.
Go figure. Although Portland they've had some issues with white supremacist types up that way. In Portland.
Yeah, but there's a strong kind of anti-fascist movement, and the community is pretty well organized. It seems like to resist that. So overall, it was actually encouraging.
Yeah, from what I've seen, they definitely have a strong. They're not letting them get away with that shit. I think they had the Proud Boys up there and a couple other. I don't give a fuck what their names are. They're a bunch of fascists. I don't really care.
Yep.
yep.
Let's just narrow it down to that. Anyway, so first of all, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. So, I'm kind of an academic these days, but I started off in public policy and organizing. I started working on policing stuff almost 30 years ago when I was working at the San Francisco Coalition on Homelessness, doing what I thought I was going to be doing for the long term, which was kind of housing policy, economic development stuff. But at that time, a lot of the homeless folks and formerly homeless folks we were working with were complaining about a really increased level of police harassment. And my boss at the time, Paul Bowden, who now runs the Western Regional Advocacy Project, he asked me to look into this. And I had to learn everything on the fly with help of the ACLU and some other well-meaning folks. But basically, that was the beginning of broken windows policing. And what was clear to me was that broken windows policing was an attempt to basically criminalize those folks who are on the losing end of the kind of austerity politics and these new kind of neoliberal arrangements. and that we can't really understand the politics of cities, the social dynamic of cities, without understanding the central role that use of the police to criminalize these populations plays. So I've always kind of gone back and forth between kind of deep reading and research and teaching, and also organizing and advocacy. And I've worked on all kinds of organizing projects over the years. So everything from food not bombs work when I was out in California to anti-nuclear stuff, rolling back the drug laws, and of course now I'm really excited to be part of this kind of national movement to roll back policing.
So you've been in the shit, is what you're telling me.
Yes, yes,
To put it in the vernacular.
yes.
So you've got a bit of, I would say, with this book of yours, Into Policing, you have a little experience upon seeing it on the ground level. What'd you say?
Yeah, well, I spent really 20 years as a police scholar, working with police departments and observing police departments, not just in the U.S., but internationally. So I think one of the things that I bring to the book that others have had more difficulty doing is that kind of insider knowledge about what police really do every day. So I could just sort of cut through the kind of standard liberal ideological nonsense about what policing is, and also the thin blue line nonsense, which is worse in many ways. And I knew the literature that said that so many of the reforms that the police agreed to, like implicit bias training or community policing, that these things don't work, that they only exist to provide political cover, to divert movements, to distract people from what's really needed. And so I tried to call as much of that out as I could.
Well, on this show, sir, obviously we're a little bit biased because we're not a big fan of the
No.
the
The
police.
popo,
No.
Yes,
The
we're
fuzz, the 5-0.
Yeah, we use
5-0, 12.
other more controversial terms. But anyway, let's not. We're not going to get into that too much. But can you just kind of give us a brief thesis of what your book's about?
Sure. So, the motivation for writing the book was really this 30 years of watching episodic movements angry about police abuses that never really go anywhere. That kind of, something horrible happens and people get angry, and then the police agree to a few reforms, and then the movement dies away and nothing really changes. And I was like, need a different kind of program so that when bad things happen, we quit asking for things that are not going to bring about real changes. So the thesis of the book is we don't need nicer, better trained police. We need fewer police. That the problems of policing cannot be fixed with some training and oversight mechanisms, and that the harms that police cause are not because they're not doing their jobs properly. It's because they've been given the wrong job. That we don't need to give narcotics units anti-bias training. We don't need better trained school police. We don't need more accountability for vice units. We just need to get rid of those police functions. They're inherently harmful. They reproduce profound race and class inequalities. And we could deal with those issues in much more productive ways that kind of build people and communities up instead of criminalizing.
So when you say they're given the wrong jobs, are you specifically talking about the positions they're filled, or both the people that are being filled into the roles in tandem?
It's not about the people. It's not about the people. I'm not one of these people who thinks, well, we're going to fix policing by having higher standards, making them go to college. For the most part, there's not really anything wrong with them. It's that they should not be doing what they're doing. So it's about the mission. We don't need better qualified narcotics officers. We need to end the war on drugs. That's the fundamental kind of approach of the book, is that so much of what police do today, they just shouldn't be doing. And the only reason they're doing it is because political leaders have decided that poor non-white people in particular, but poor people in general, don't deserve to have actual adequate health care or housing or youth services. They just need police to go around threatening them to get them to behave in the desired way. And so this is really about trying to turn that on its head and to say that the communities have problems, but the solution to those problems is not more police. Because police have the wrong tools to really solve the community's problems. They don't have access to mental health services. They don't have access to affordable housing. They don't have access to real youth programs, school counts, right? These are the things communities really need to be improved. And every time we turn a problem over to the police, we're basically unleashing all this coercive, punitive capacity that just makes people's lives worse.
So if I could follow up with maybe a overly broad question, it's how do you feel about the whole ACAB, all cops are bastards thing that's happening?
FTP.
Yep.
So I'm not so interested in that in a sense, because it's not really about the personality or predilection of individual police officers. Yes, there are cops who are white supremacists, and yes, there are cops who are sadists, but I also know cops all over the world who wake up every day thinking that what they're doing is trying to help people, help communities. Many of them increasingly do come from the communities that they're policing. And to me, it just doesn't make sense to make it about the personality of individual police officers. In a sense, that lets the politicians off the hook. And that is where I think the focus needs to be. I often say to people, I think the book is not a book about police accountability, it's a book about political accountability. And so I'm not really interested in vilifying individual police officers. I'm interested in looking at the structural decision making that has turned every damn problem in the world over to the police to manage.
That's a fair assessment. Obviously, that's why you're the expert. So let's we've gone through the thesis. Can kind of a brief, as brief as possible, I suppose, about kind of the history of policing in the U.S. That kind of started. I know in the book you had mentioned that in London, Scotland Yard was kind of the first policing mechanism that was used. But how about here in the States?
Well, I think, it's important to understand the development of policing as an international phenomenon. And my friend Stuart Schrader has this new book called Badges Beyond Borders that really makes this point, which is that the rise of American policing cannot be understood independently of what's going on around the world. And so let me just maybe tell the story this way, which is to say that there's a standard liberal myth that says that the first police force is the London Metropolitan Police, created in 1829 by Sir Robert Peel, Robert, Bob, the Bobbies. And they say, oh, well, Bob Peel came up with this great idea to create a civilian, professional, uniformed police force that would be a preferable alternative to the kind of informal watch or the use of the militia, and that this was advancing the rule of law. But what gets left out of that narrative, and there's an international dimension to this, is that the job that Peel had before creating the London Metropolitan Police was that he was in charge of the English occupation of Ireland, a colonial project. And he experiments with the development of policing to manage the agricultural uprisings that are occurring in the Irish countryside. And he takes those ideas and brings them to bear in the urban setting of the UK. And then American cities see what's going on in the UK. They're experiencing mass immigration, development of a mass industrial working class, and they too are facing the same dilemma of the informal watch and the militia being inadequate. And they join in developing modern policing to manage this industrial workforce. But that's only one of the influences in the creation of modern American policing. There's two others. First, I argue the first real modern police force that fits the standard liberal definition is the Charleston City Watch and Guard that's created in the 1790s. And the reason it's never talked about in the liberal scholarship is that the primary mission of that police force was the management of a mobile slave population. Because in the big southern cities, slaves worked outside the home of their owners, on piers, in warehouses, in factories, and a police force was needed, a kind of outgrowth of slave patrols, but different, because it's professional, it's uniformed, it's law enforcement oriented, that is keeping track of all these slaves in motion because there's a pervasive fear of slave revolts. But the liberal narrative doesn't want to embrace the roots of policing being so clearly tied to slavery. And then the third influence is colonialism. So I mentioned the Irish case, but also a lot of police forces get created at the turn of the century in the wake of the U.S. occupation of the Philippines during the Spanish-American War. And it was that occupation in which American policing takes a whole new leap technologically and in terms of strategy. And people who were involved in that day-to-day occupation in the Philippines are brought in to start up and retrain new police forces all across the country. And we had our own domestic police, colonial police force, which was the Texas Rangers. Rangers were created to eliminate the indigenous population by either displacing them or exterminating them, and then also displacing the historical settlers from Spain and Mexico to make way for white settlement. And that Texas Rangers police force was held up as a model for policing in the West. So these three interacting forces have really shaped the fundamental nature of American policing. And all of that leads to this kind of central conclusion, which is that we have to understand policing as primarily a mechanism for managing the consequences of inequality, of regimes of exploitation. Because whether you're a colonial subject or a slave or an industrial worker, you're going to resist that exploitation formally through strikes and revolts, and informally through working class pleasures and rebellious behavior and sometimes property theft. And policing exists to manage those consequences of exploitation.
So when they speak of serve and protect, what they mean is to serve and protect the moneyed interests, the elites.
Those regimes of exploitation.
Right. And I just find it very, because I live here in the South, and I had heard the policing, and especially after the Dred Scott decision, where northern slaves had to be returned back. The escaped slaves in the North had to be returned.
Yeah, the Escaped Slave Act. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's part of that. There's a whole. Of course, they weren't an organized force, but obviously, but that kind of. And of course, after slavery was abolished, police forces were repurposed. Well, slave catchers were repurposed as those who would catch vagrants, black people if they weren't working, and they use that as an excuse to imprison them, which is basically a new kind of slavery, which is a whole different.
Well, it was actually, I think we should think of it as worse than slavery. The convict leasing system that you're sort of alluding to here, when people were accused of vagrancy, brought into the criminal justice system, and then sold into a new form of slavery. But slaves, at least, involved a lifetime investment. They were capital. And so there was a disincentive to work them to death or to penalize them by killing them. But under convict leasing, people pay a yearly fee for each convict. And so employers literally work them to death by the tens of thousands. Recently, a mass grave was found in Texas, and we know these exist all through the South. And yes, this was a central feature of American criminal justice policy in the post-Reconstruction era. Up until really the 1920s, and then after that, you continue to have prison plantations and other extremely exploitative forms of criminal justice policy towards African Americans.
Would you say that what you just described, the modern version of that would be these work programs, quote unquote, where you have corporate interests contracting for-profit prisons and stuff like that for labor for one purpose or another and one type or another?
I think we have to understand the situation today a little bit differently because there's actually not a lot of labor exploitation. A lot of states don't contract with private employers. The vast majority of prisoners are not involved in that kind of labor. I think we have to understand the criminal justice system today as a system of warehousing surplus labor. Labor that, moneyed interests cannot find a suitable use for. And so they are warehousing these people literally by the millions. And that is because the regimes of exploitation have changed. We don't have slavery. We don't have colonialism. We don't even have mass industrial production anymore. We have this flexible service economy, and it prefers to often rely on immigrants who lack labor rights and are unorganized, et cetera. And so we've created this massive surplus workforce, and the strategy has just been to drive them into prisons to keep them from raising difficulties, making demands, et cetera.
Part of the motivation for me asking that is, I guess most recently, like the fires in California and stuff like that, where they were allowing inmates to go and be essentially firefighters. But when they got out, if they got out, obviously they're not the worst offenders because they were allowed to do that in the first place. The inability to do that same job when they're out versus when they're in for nominal amounts of money. Like, to me, I have a hard time differentiating those two things.
Yeah, I see. There's definitely an analogy there, but that's a very small number of prisoners. It's very small, so that it doesn't really characterize mass incarceration, and that's really the issue. So yes, there are private prisons and there are corporations exploiting prison labor, and yes, we need to speak out about that. But even if we eliminated private prisons and got rid of the prison labor, we would still have mass incarceration. And I think that's the key, strategic issue to keep in mind here.
And that will be the subject of another show if I can find somebody to talk about that. Mass incarceration, the complex, the prison complex, maybe even prison abolition. But anyway.
Yeah, well, I can certainly suggest some people for you.
Yeah, I would actually.
That'd be great.
Yeah, actually. But I wanted to kind of steer back towards your book. One of the name of your chapters, if I'm not mistaken, is the policemen are not your friend, or I might be.
The police are not here to protect you.
Here to protect you, sir. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why you would make such a statement. That is outrageous, sir. But to be honest, and it may actually strike some liberals, especially whites, upper class liberals, because they're usually the ones that benefit the most. They're the ones that are perhaps served and protected. They might be actually shocked to hear this, because I don't think they really pay attention. At least they see it on the news. Of course, those, the riots in Ferguson or various other things like that. I mean,
yeah.
So what do you mean that they're not here to serve you?
Well, so
protect you. Sorry.
Yeah, people again have this liberal myth in their mind that police exist to prevent crime, to solve crime, to produce public safety. And the problem is that they're actually not very effective at any of that, because that's not really the prime objective. The prime objective is maintaining a certain level of social stability to allow these regimes of exploitation to move forward. That is a much better explainer of what they actually do all day, every day. You know, the vast majority of serious crime is never even reported to the police. And that amount that is reported, the majority of it is not solved. Even homicides, only a little over half get solved. And of course, solving a homicide doesn't prevent the homicide from having happened. It's after the fact. The whole management of public spaces is not really about solving problems or making certainly homeless people any safer, right? It's about creating the conditions that allow this kind of corporate neoliberal future to keep rolling right along. So yes, if you call the police, generally they will come, and you know, in some cases they will try to save you from some bad person. But in reality, that's not really what police do. That's a very rare occurrence. And for very poor people, even calling them in a crisis can be counterproductive. And we hear these accounts over and over again from folks where I called the police to get help and I ended up getting arrested, or my son ended up getting shot, or my boyfriend got shot. And yes, I wanted him to quit beating me up, but I didn't want him killed or put in jail for 10 years. And so a lot of what the book is about is laying out what we could do instead of relying on police to address those very real concerns.
So yeah, I found that particularly interesting because it seems like people are loath to. I don't think they can think outside that box, right? They're so used to police taking on these roles that they can't imagine what other structures are already in place actually that
Yeah,
could be used as an alternative except for the police. I mean, can you give a couple examples where uh,
sure.
the police wouldn't would not be the best arbiters of in certain
Yeah, in
situations?
fact, you know, what some people ask me is just, well, what would the alternative force look like? Like we're just going to replace it with some other one thing that does sort of the same thing, but we don't call it the. I'm like, no, it's not about that at all. It's about identifying specific problems that we want to do something about, and then developing strategies to deal with that. So right now we have a police force that's supposed to solve every damn problem under the sun. They're not good at most of what they are sent to do. Often what they do is counterproductive, and they can't be all things in all situations. So what's the problem we're trying to deal with? Well, the opioid crisis. The policing is a terrible tool to use to resolve that problem. In fact, it almost certainly has made the opioid crisis dramatically worse than it needed to be. Instead, we need to be looking at regimes of legalization, harm reduction, creating safe injection facilities, public health campaigns. You know, every part of this country has policing on demand, and no part of this country has high quality medical drug treatment on demand. People go to wait lists and wait around for a week for a slot, you know. So we've completely perverted this system away from helping people towards keeping this kind of moralistic war going, this war on drugs that only makes the problem worse. Let's take the problem in schools, you know, with not so much the shooters, we can talk about that, but everyday school problems. You know, over the last 40 years, we've dismantled extracurricular activities. We've fired most of the counselors. We've reoriented education towards high stakes standardized testing. Kids are bored, they act out, they bring problems from home and the community that don't get dealt with. We don't need more high quality school policing to deal with that. We need more counselors, We need restorative justice programs in the schools. We need wraparound services for young people and their families, a kind of community schools model that some people are trying. So youth violence, we need to look at violence interrupter and cure violence programs that are based in communities that do peer-to-peer outreach. We need to figure out new ways to invest in young people, to give them some stake in conformity, some hope of some kind of future, to break the cycle of retributive violence, to organize gang truces. That work's happening all across the country. The research shows it's incredibly effective. But it runs against this narrative that says that crime is the result of individual and group moral failure that will only respond to these punitive interventions. So our kind of commitment to use policing in prisons is ideological, and it's tied to a political program that's incredibly regressive and dehumanizing, especially to poor and non-white folks.
Well, I just thought that your beginning chapter, it kind of sets it out that your every chapter kind of, well, here's what police do now, what they shouldn't do, and let's examine each thing that each of their duties now that could be relegated to other sections,
Yep.
people or whatever. I wanted to talk next about the war on drugs, and of course, you just mentioned that specifically in your talk right there. The war on drugs is something, of course, anybody who pays any attention to is an abject failure, and has been since it began.
Yeah.
So,
well, let's, Michel Foucault, the French philosopher, says that it's only a failure if you assume that its purpose was actually to make people healthier and safer. But if we understand that that was never the purpose, then in fact it's been incredibly successful, because the purpose was to criminalize a whole set of suspect populations in a way that solved a set of very important political problems. So if we date the modern version of the war on drugs to the Nixon administration, we see that it was part of the so-called Southern strategy, which was in the wake of the civil rights movement to try to switch historically Democratic voters in the South over to the Republican Party by making it clear to them that the Republicans were going to shut the door on black civil rights, not by bringing back segregation, but by bringing back law and order politics through the war on drugs. So that Nixon's own advisors on drug policy were in favor of harm reduction and legalization. And they were completely overruled because politically what Nixon was interested in was criminalizing his enemies in a way to appeal to a white voter base. The war on drugs has always played that role. It's always been a political tool, not a tool for making people healthier, safer, because it does exactly the opposite. It contributes to overdoses, contributes to bad health outcomes, and it contributes to mass criminalization, which reduces life expectancies and quality of life and everything else. And it's not like you can point to some place and say, oh, look, they can't get drugs. I always say, we've had this war on drugs for over 40 years in the modern form, and drugs are cheaper, of higher quality, and easier to get than they ever have been. Any young person in our society can get any kind of illegal drugs they want whenever they want them. And when I speak in high schools and colleges, I always say, if your grade in this class depended upon whether or not you could get illegal drugs, is there anyone who'd be at risk of failing? And they all laugh, right? Because everyone in the society knows that anyone can get any kind of drugs they want. So this idea that drug prohibition is preventing someone from getting drugs is ludicrous, because it's never about that.
In a sense, it's almost the ironic, unintentional antithesis to the idea that capitalism solves all the problems. Because they killed the supply. There's a demand. Somebody filled it. I don't know. It's the whole thing seems antithetical as far as that goes. And
the irony is, look at what we did with gambling, right? So they tried a strategy of criminalization on gambling, to break up organized crime and to actually exert more financial control over poor communities. And they created all these state lotteries. Now, the state lotteries are desirable in the sense that they did take the organized criminality out of it. And so, we are capable of decriminalizing things that are in high demand. And civilization, as we know it, does not collapse. And Portugal has legalized all drugs, decriminalized all drugs, and civilization has not collapsed. Health outcomes look better. The police are generally very happy not to be in the drug business anymore. And this is a model that other countries should look at, including our own.
Absolutely.
There's a book called Chasing the Scream. I don't know if either of you have read it, but that is a very deep dive into that, starting with Anslinger and going all the way to, just how it was never, like you said, it was never about making anybody healthy or caring about the people.
Yeah, one of the most tragic stories in that book is about the death of Billie Holiday. So Anslinger was furious about the drug use in the Black arts community. And he launches a set of crusades against Black jazz musicians and others to try to wipe out the scourge of heroin. And he hounded personally Billie Holiday for years, criminalized her, denied her adequate mental health care, and was directly involved in her death, all as part of this war on drugs.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole premise of at least the marijuana side of things with Anslinger was the DEA was in danger at the time, or for lack of a better term, in danger at the time of losing some of their federal funding. And it was just very convenient to demonize Hispanic people, Black people, and somehow twist it into a lot of the propaganda that we see where it's some guy sleeping with a sombrero on, but he's got this dream bubble above his head with a swastika in it. And it was all very just kind of, now we look at it and it's absurd. But at the time, just a little before Reefer Madness kicked in, not too terribly long, it was just all a very convenient and expedient way to demonize people of color and minorities.
Well, the war of drugs has always been about a set of racial projects. Criminalization of opium 100 years ago was targeted at Asians from China. Marijuana was tied to the criminalization of Mexicans along the southern border and Blacks in the cities, especially in the art circles. Cocaine was tied to the fear of unrepressed Black rage and sexuality. And of course, the modern war on drugs was an incredibly explicit racial project. And we had folks from the Nixon administration come forward and say quite clearly that they knew that's what it was about. This was all very open and explicit inside the White House. This was about criminalizing Black people and had nothing to do with public health and public safety.
Well, as you said in the book, and I'm sure a lot of people already know this, is the amount of drug use in the white and Black population is about the same.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow Black people are disproportionately charged with drug offenses and are in prison for that.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. So drug enforcement, again, drug enforcement is not about stopping drugs. It's not about saving lives. It's about a project of criminalization for political purposes. Once you understand that frame, then the patterns of enforcement activity make perfect sense. There are no buy and bust operations on Wall Street. But we know everybody on there has access to drugs, that drug use is rampant, and there are overdoses and other harms that come with that drug use, and it is completely ignored because that population has not been labeled as a suspect population to be managed through intensive punitive policing.
Well, they don't have political power. And I think a lot of this boils down to lack of political power. Black people of color in general don't have that kind of, we're trying to get a little bit of it back, but historically it's been an uphill battle. And so therefore, unless you're putting money in the politicians' pockets, I feel like they're not getting the fair shake. Go figure.
Yeah,
So
that's for sure.
so I just wonder. So we're talking about the war on drugs, and we're talking about what we're doing wrong, what we have historically done incorrectly. Why don't you speak a little bit to what we should do instead of what they're trying to do now?
Right. So, I mean, the most immediate thing that's very exciting is the rise of marijuana legalization initiatives across the country, and I fully support these. I think how it's done matters. I think we have to create the models that look to reinvest tax revenues into those communities that have historically been criminalized. So we need to use legalization not just as a harm reduction strategy, but also as a strategy for advancing racial and economic justice agendas. I think that we have to understand heroin and opioid addiction as a medical problem, that we should be looking at regimes of either legalization or medical distribution of heroin. Chasing the Scream has a great discussion of the legal heroin distribution program in England that Anslinger shut down, that was saving a tremendous number of lives, because when people have access to a regular medical grade supply, their usage rates go down, they go back to work, their lives stabilize, and they don't spend all day every day trying to come up with the money, chasing down the dealer, finding a place to shoot up, right? That characterizes the life of an addict in many circumstances today. We need to look at a whole host of harm reduction strategies, needle exchange, safe injection facilities, public health messaging, peer-to-peer outreach. These are the kinds of things that are really going to save lives. And I would just encourage people to look at the Drug Policy Alliance website, which goes into great detail about all these kinds of measures.
So I just wonder, is there anything that at all that we're doing right now that is productive, or is it just we got to throw everything out and start all over?
It's all bad. There are examples of places that are doing good things, like the marijuana legalization. There are efforts, and if we look internationally, we can see even more good examples. In a growing number of places, police are being removed from the sex work industry. So New Zealand fully legalized sex work, parts of Australia. There's decriminalization in parts of Latin America and Europe. We have legalization in the rural parts of Nevada, and it's not a great situation, but it's vastly better than a situation of criminalization. We could talk about those places that have gotten the cops out of the schools and more counselors and restorative justice programs. Places that are really pursuing a housing first agenda to deal with homelessness and mental health problems. Los Angeles is in the process of trying to get police out of the mental health business. Between 1.25% of all people killed by police in the United States are having a mental health crisis, and there's really no reason for the police to be involved in the vast majority of these situations in the first place. So, there are places that are doing this part, that part, they're experimenting, and we just need to keep advancing that agenda.
So, if anybody wanted to kind of further educate themselves on this issue, do you have any suggestions? What they could watch,
Well,
read?
they should certainly pick up the book, which is filled with hundreds of endnotes to reports and research about alternatives. I have a website called policingandjustice.org that has a building communities page that's filled with reports about what we could be doing instead of relying on the police. Folks can follow me on Twitter at a Vitale. So there, and there's a a growing group of researchers and more importantly community activists working through groups like Critical Resistance and the Advancement Project that are doing really important work on this. So you can plug in through social media and et cetera to be part of these conversations.
Okay, since we have more time, I did want to address the issue of mental illness and how, and specifically because this is an issue that really kind of bothers the shit out of me, to be quite honest with you.
Me as well.
Because I'm mentally ill. I'm most people probably. I know a lot of people who are mentally ill and suffer from mental illness.
This system really threatens all of our mental health.
Yeah. And so this is something I'm sure affects probably most people, either know someone or themselves suffer from mental illness. And some of these stories that we see coming out, I mean, you mentioned this already. They call, to come deal with somebody that's mentally ill and they ended up fucking dead, because at this point, I don't know how you can, especially if you're a person of color, how you can think I wouldn't ever fucking call a cop, but especially when it comes to anything regarding mental illness, considering seeing the stories I've seen, it's really disgusting and it's just infuriating. Even just from a human perspective, much less if it was a police. I don't care. A police officer's a fucking human being, right? You're telling me I get your training is to is to fucking lethal force is for some reason the first thing you're thinking. But I mean, I don't know. It just seems to me like if you're a human being, you can see this person's hurting. Is your lack of empathy just overwhelming? I don't get it.
Well, see, it's again, it's the wrong tool. Right? If we don't want violence and we don't want racism, don't get the police involved. So the strategy here can't be to fix the police response through some training or oversight. It's not going to work. Maybe it will make some marginal difference, but it's not really going to get to the heart of the problem. We have to quit using police. And there are other places that have figured this out. A lot of the folks who get killed by police it's a kind of suicide by cop dynamic. As tragic and fucked up as that sounds, people in the U.S. know that if they call 911 and say they're having a crisis, someone with a gun is going to come. And if they pull out something that looks like a gun, a toy gun or whatever, there's a good chance the police are going to kill them. In the UK, there's no such thing. Because no one in the UK thinks that when they're having a mental health crisis and call for help, that someone with a gun is going to come and shoot them, no matter what they do. It just doesn't happen. And just as importantly, we have a massive volume of these crisis calls, a couple 100,000 every year just in New York City, because we have no mental health system so that people get into a crisis. So that if we had some kind of decent primary mental health care in communities, we wouldn't have so many crisis calls. But when we do have crisis calls, what we need is to have a 24-hour, highly trained capability that can respond to these calls with professional mental health workers. And these are people who have experience dealing with people who are combative, maybe even somewhat violent, and they have strategies for dealing with that. There's a great program in Eugene, Oregon called Cahoots. It's not perfect, but it's a community-based 24-hour crisis response capability that's staffed by mental health workers and outreach workers, and they deal with folks having a mental health crisis, experiencing homelessness, dealing with substance abuse problems, and nobody gets killed. And if you call 911 in Eugene and you don't, as long as you don't say this person has a gun or something, they will send this alternative response capability. This is what we need all across the country. And there are a number of cities now, because of community pressure, who are exploring that. And that is, we've got a campaign underway here in New York that I'm fully supporting, and we need more of that to happen all across the country.
I think Denver was trying to do something like that recently, where they had a mental health. Now, again, it's not perfect.
So I think in Denver, and I know in a lot of cities, including here in New York, what they've set upon is this co-response capability.
Yeah.
Which is they send police and a social worker, or police and a mental. This is a mistake, because it is the police officer that destabilizes the encounter.
Okay. Yeah.
What we need is folks who are not police to go out and develop relationships based on trust. In fact, we need to be hiring people who've been experiencing mental health crises in their lives, who can do real, authentic peer-to-peer outreach to build trust and empathy and understanding, to help people get into a more stable situation, which is only possible if we have things like supportive housing and ongoing primary mental health.
Well, I think for a lot of people, especially depending on what their situation is, whether they're going through like maybe a gnarly custody thing, or they got fired from their job or whatever it is, I think that they may want to reach out to people for help, but there's an overlying penalty, for lack of a better term, for like, if say you're feeling suicidal or have suicidal ideation and stuff like that, and you call even a well-intentioned hotline, which is, to be clear, is better than not.
Yes.
Like if you have any of these problems, like please do call people. But the idea of, you go and talk to a therapist, because you're feeling suicidal or whatever it is, that these records be used against you somehow in the future, depending on, custody things, different things like that. I think there's an overall, in people that I've talked to and in my experience, a general kind of fear to seek help because of repercussions for doing what should be considered the right thing, but the stigma behind it becomes a problem.
Yeah. Well, I think we could look at in a sense, models like AA. I have a number of problems with AA, but one of the good things about AA is that it is peer-to-peer and it is anonymous. And I think that part of the model we could be looking at, and there are examples of this, co-counseling and other kinds of therapeutic regimes where people do not deal with a professional clinician, but they deal with support groups or one-on-one relationships with someone who's also had these problems and is experiencing their own difficulties, with maybe access to a professional for training, advice, etc. So there are a lot of models out here about how to do community-based mental health care. Right now, the system is so degraded and it is so emergency focused and stigmatized that you're absolutely right. There are people who won't access this, not only because of fear of repercussions, but because it just doesn't work very well, because it's so inadequate and piecemeal. And so what we have to do is put a real situation, a real infrastructure in place, just like we do with violence and other kinds of substance abuse, a real comprehensive infrastructure that then will be more effective and will engender more trust in users, and then it will have a kind of virtuous feedback loop.
Well, what's kind of fucked up about the whole thing is that the biggest housers of mentally ill people are prisons.
And jails, yes.
Jails.
Absolutely. Well, that is exactly the problem, right? Is that we've taken funding for mental health services and eviscerated it, and then turned the problem over to the criminal justice system, which just makes it worse. That's really the core dilemma that we're dealing with here, whether it's substance misuse, mental health, unemployment, involvement in black markets, violence. All of it has been turned over to the criminal justice system, and this is just a huge mistake and fundamentally unjust.
Do you think for-profit prisons have exacerbated the situation?
No, I don't think they've exacerbated the situation. I think they're a symptom of the situation.
Okay. So obviously the solution would be then to have a mental health system, which is an outgrowth of an actual working health system in this country as as a whole. Um,
Yeah,
so
I'll just give you one quick example here.
sure, yeah.
In England, where they have national health insurance, there's a separate phone number to call if you're having a mental health crisis that's tied to the National Health Service. And when you put that call in, the dispatch person in the dispatch room is a registered nurse who has access to the National Health Service records. So that as the team is responding to the site, that nurse can tell the team what to expect. Oh, you're going to John Smith's house? Well, he has a diagnosis of schizophrenia. Here's the name of his primary physician. This is the medication he's on. This is the responsible person that he lives with. And this is the location of the community clinic nearby where he's been taken. So it's an integrated system so that when they get there, they can address that person from a position of knowledge and respect and try to say, hey, we're here to help you work this out. I know you're having a crisis, but let's try to figure this out together. And nobody's getting arrested.
So it's very similar. If we had to draw an analogy to the U.S., it's very similar to the way you call 911 and, oh, somebody's breaking into my house. The way the dispatch communicates constantly with the police officers,
Yes.
They have that, but with people that are trained to deal
That's right.
with
You're on the line with 911 and they're giving a description of the person. And here's what, yes, exactly. Except in this case,
that would be
it's
amazing.
positive, useful information. Yeah.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. And it's not inconceivable. This actually exists in the world. We just refuse to do it here.
Well, the political will has to be there. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And this is the point of the book. The book, this is not an academic book. I made a conscious decision to write a book to help try to change the political conversation. This is a book for people in communities on the ground trying to figure this out, engage in these struggles. It's a resource tool for them. And the work I do now, traveling the country, is about trying to change that political calculation on the ground to get people to quit thinking that the solution to their problem is to hire more police to manage whatever problems they have out of desperation. No, now's the time to ask for the things that we really want, that would really make our communities better. We've got a political opening now, and we've got to really go for it and quit asking for half measures that it turns out don't really work.
I do like how you've tied in all these common thread, like you just said throughout your book, is kind of the socio-political things going on, and it really boils down to political will to get all these things in order to. That's the root. We have to want to do these things and bring it about. Otherwise, it's never going to get fixed. And so, like you said, it's it's trying to get people in the political sphere, and obviously people who are protesting kind of concentrate their efforts into what they can ask the politicians for.
Yeah, quit asking for body cameras and community policing.
So let's get your conclusion to the book or whatever. So what is your overall? We just pretty much covered just about everything I can think of as far as, like I just said, the socio-political ramifications, what we can do to kind of try to remedy that situation. But is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Just when we call on police, when we call for more criminalization, tougher hate crime laws, these kinds of things, we're actually empowering the mechanisms of our own oppression. That when we understand the criminal justice system has never been a tool of liberation, of real justice, of advancing equality, we understand it as a regime for advancing inequality, then we should know that anytime we call upon that system, it's not going to give us what we really want. So we've got to get that system out of our lives as much as possible and instead demand the kinds of things that will actually make us happier, healthier, more resilient, etc. And that means rejecting both the kind of thin blue line nonsense of police are the solution to everything and the liberal reformist agenda that says that, well, if we can just get the police to be nicer and more professional, everything will be fine. So that's the real message.
I like how you brought up everything can't be peaceful. That's an interesting twist I didn't see coming. You want to expound on that a little bit?
Expand on what exactly? Say that again.
You said everything can't be peaceful. This idea that everything can't be peaceful. I was just wondering what you meant by that.
Well, that the changes that we want are not going to happen entirely through just going and voting for Bernie Sanders, because these systems of exploitation are incredibly powerful and there are tremendous interests involved, and there will be resistance. And some of that will take the form of political policing, of using the police to infiltrate and undermine our movements. But we should expect all kinds of resistance, criminalization, direct repression, etc. So, yes, while we want mass movements and we want to advance things through broad processes, we should also expect there to be resistance.
And if I can add one thing, I would say one of the biggest things people can do, seeing as how we have like a 43% voter turnout, is to get out, get active, participate, because, sitting here and doing this podcast, watching all the videos and, sharing all whatever you find on Facebook, you have to still participate.
Yeah, I think we don't want to limit this, though, to some idea about electoral politics as being the be-all and end-all of what it means to do something or to get involved. I think, electoral politics is a tool that we have available to us, and we should treat it with some respect, but also some skepticism. Really, my goal is to create community power. Community power is mobilized, then eventually that will have an electoral expression. But it's also about creating our own institutions, our own ability to support each other, and to create the political power that is capable of bringing about more substantive changes in these regimes of exploitation.
I agree with that.
Do you think groups like Antifa have a role in this?
Well, Antifa, I think, is a function of our movements. It's a security function, but I think we need to look at broader multi-issue formations like DSA, like Black Lives Matter, Black Youth Project. People who are doing real community organizing, building power, issue-based organizing, and each of those movements needs the ability to defend itself from infiltrators, police repression, and also just people who will be disruptive and destabilize our movements. But I don't believe that we need to invest ourselves into a massive kind of security culture that cuts us off from communities and talk publicly about what we're trying to do.
So if somebody were to listen to this and they're like, you know what, I want to do something, but I don't know how, are there any specific groups or resources that you personally find intriguing, inspiring, that you would recommend to somebody that asked you that, maybe a student or somebody?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing I would do is to look at DSA. Not because it's perfect or it's the be-all and end-all, but it is a national movement. It's on college campuses, it's in communities, and they have working groups that work on specific issues, usually in partnership with other community-based organizations. And so it can be an entry point into a community and the kind of organizing that's going on there. And it has a low threshold to put your foot in there and try to get something going.
And for those who don't know what DSA stands for.
So Democratic Socialists of America. And there are 50, 60,000 members across the country now. And, there's like 6 in Montana. and they're in different parts of Wyoming, and they're on college campuses all across the country. So
I can't even
yeah,
think of 6 cities in fucking Montana.
I know. I only know because I'm going, and I'm hoping to speak in a
Oh,
couple of them
really?
this
You've been
summer.
called to
Yeah,
action, Montana.
there's in Helena, in Bozeman, in
Bozeman,
Missoula. I mean, this
okay.
is a real thing. There, I met with a guy who's in the Eastern Idaho chapter. You know,
Ooh.
this is a real thing that people could plug into.
DSA, there's actually a chapter here in Nashville, and I keep meaning to go to meetings and never actually go, but I should start going. And I'm glad to Montana. I was there fairly recently, and that state's a little more. It's not quite as here in the South. Everything's like dead hard, fucking evangelical, fucking
Yeah.
Republicanism. Montana's more kind of a libertarian leaning.
It's true. It's true. But
And
that's not exactly, democratic socialism is a pretty radical idea in Montana, too.
Well, I think yeah, but at least they seem to be they're a little more open to maybe discussing it, whereas they're a little more ideological down here in
Yeah.
the South.
They're at least in proximity to people that know what's going on.
And there are a lot of DSA chapters in the South. I've done events with handful of them.
At the end of
in Atlanta this summer. Yeah.
At the end of this, if there are any links or resources that you want to give us, we'll put it in the show notes so people can go to
Right.
it.
Yeah, why
sure.
don't you just let's why don't you go ahead and give us those things?
So I mentioned before that my organization, the Policing and Social Justice Project, our website is policingandjustice.org. My personal website is alex-vitale.info. And people can find me on Twitter at @avitale. And, DSA, Critical Resistance, these are groups that people can plug into about ideas and organize.
And we will have those in the show notes, of course. If you would not mind, sir, shooting them to me, these
Sure.
links that you just mentioned. Is there anything else you would like to say before we let you go?
We've got this presidential race that's sucking all the oxygen out of the room. And of course, it's important, but we can't turn all of our politics towards this never-ending horse race. We've got to stay focused on actually building community power, because in the long run, that's what's going to create space for the kinds of politicians that we really want.
Yeah, no. The oxygen is definitely being sucked up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Mr. Vitale, I really appreciate you coming on, making time to come on.
You bet, guys.
I've read your book.
Thank you very
like
much.
I said, I love your book, and
thank you.
And I'm
next time I'll remember to pour a pint before I get on the.
Yeah, definitely. If you're on Untapped, I don't know if that's like a social media for beer drinkers. You get to check into different beers or whatever.
Okay, I didn't know about that, but I will check it out.
Sir, I'm a beer nerd, so I have to know these things. So
Respect.
I'm kind of obliged. All right, sir. Well, again, thank you for coming on, and
you bet.
Take care of yourself.
Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
All right. Well, wow. Okay, that was great. A little nervous.
That was great.
He was saying some things I was not expecting.
Yeah, I know.
He's a little more radical, honestly, than
and see, some of his views on stuff kind of didn't. I'm not going to say turn things on its head as far as like some of the things I think, but I have stuff to consider.
Yeah, he's definitely. And I give him more respect, and I would give him his words more weight, simply because, like I said, he's been on the ground and he's talked to people. He knows what's going on, as opposed to somebody just sitting on their ass doing podcasts and shit.
I don't know who that is.
I don't know who
that is.
So that was great. I'm glad I had him on. I was nervous as fuck, obviously, because he's a great guy. I'm kind of a fanboy. All right, I'll leave that alone.
But I'm gonna ask you this: is it better or exactly what you expected?
It's about what I expected. I mean, I'm a pretty good planner, so I try to plan things out ahead of time, so I don't have any surprises.
Honestly, I wish we had him for another like hour or two to dovetail off.
Yeah, we could have talked about the whole book, but to be honest with you, what I said before, this socio-political thread that runs out through the whole book is pretty much that. To me, that is the main thing. Is like what we have to do, what is causing all this. All these are just symptoms of a larger problem.
Well, and I think maybe at a different show, it would have to be an extended one over an hour or multi-part. Is I think a lot of people feel the way we do and feel the way he does, but this idea of getting involved or taking part is kind of an abstract to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to have like a couple of people on who are actually on the ground activist types who could kind of give us some ideas of what their ideas are and what they do to try to,
Yeah,
you know.
I know some folks that I could reach out to in different areas for sure.
Yeah, I think that would be something we could definitely look into. And I forgot to ask him. I'll email him when he emails me the links. But regarding prison abolition, that's also something that I'm interested in. I would like to talk to somebody about, and maybe he could kind of hook me up with that.
I just want to pick his little box for like an hour or two. Just
Yeah, why don't you actually read the fucking book?
I can't read, you know that.
Dude, I don't want to hear the excuses anymore. You're grown, okay? You're grown.
I'll
Get
get
you some
hooked on phonics.
glasses.
It's fine. I'll get glasses, which I
Get you
actually
some
do
fucking
need.
glasses.
Yeah.
I don't care about your goddamn dyslexia. I don't care about that or whatever the fuck you have. I don't know. I don't fucking care.
It's just genetics, sir. It's
I don't give a fuck. I have genetic shit too, man. I worked through it. Go walk around the block a couple times. Whatever they tell you to do. Whatever bullshit they tell you to do.
CBD oil.
Gee, yeah, that cures it. All right, well, let's. So, if you, for some reason, want to listen to this show, and I can't imagine at this point why you would want to, you can go to the Postmodern Polymath, postmodernpolymath.com. All the shit is there. We're on Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio. I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
Really?
we're on there. Yeah.
Is that a thing still?
Yeah, it's still a thing. Spotify, I don't know. I'm not sure.
I'll
I've been
check.
trying to get on there, but it doesn't seem to want to. You have to.
I'll help you.
Oh, thanks, Kat. At least she waited till after the interview was over. Fucking bitch.
Look, she wants her appearance. Don't hate.
Google Play. It's on Google Play. I know that. Just look. It's different places. If you want to go patronize, patronize the show. If you want to use it in that older sense of being a patron, you can go to the patreon.com/the postmodern polymath. I keep forgetting.
And go on Amazon or wherever you go and find The End of Policing and buy the book.
Yeah, go out buy the. I think that would be something
Because to be honest with you, I decided I think I like to read books that are physical, not digital, better. And so I'm going to do that.
Yeah, it takes getting used to. Because I read audiobooks too, but...
I've never listened to an audiobook.
Well, because you suck.
Well, that's obvious, but that's beside the point.
No, yeah, I mean, it takes getting used to be honest with you. And digital books are, it depends what you're reading it on and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of factors involved. But yeah, definitely go read his book, The End of Policing. And if you, like I mentioned earlier, if you're interested in the whole war on drugs angle from like the very beginning, you can go read Chasing the Scream. That's a motherfucker I'd like to get on. That'd be a 2-hour interview, probably.
Maybe 3.
His book is shit. Deep, baby. Deep. Let's see what else. Oh, give me money. That's right. Give me money. Give us money so we can buy
Give him
beer.
money.
There's a PayPal link too, actually, on the page if you want to go. Give me money. So,
or just because capitalism sucks and you want to destroy it, so send what you can.
No sense at all.
That's socialism.
I don't know what's happening right now.
Whatever. I don't either. This has gone off the rails.
Okay, so fuck Trump. He's impeached. It won't make any difference. I did one mention that Pelosi finally did get this shit over there. Officially, the articles of impeachment over to the Senate or whatever for all the good it's going to do. But that's where we're at right now. And I was on the Warren train. I don't know, man. I don't know.
Dude, I'm Bernie.
I'm going.
That's what's up.
I might be going Bernie, man. We might be.
She's my second choice, but
well, I don't. The Bernie, I guess the Bernie supporters, I guess, are kind of what turned me off. But I guess you really can't. And a lot of women are going over there too, so it's not just Bernie bros.
And if anybody's interested, they can message me on Facebook or at Lyman_Smith on Twitter, and I will send you links to where you can volunteer your time via browser to message out and reach out to people through moveon.org, a political group that tries to get people active for not only Bernie, but also in your area, whatever state you're in. They will message you. I get text messages all the time, every time something happens in Maryland or Arizona. And you can reach out to people via text through a web browser and not give away your personal information and try to volunteer your time, which I've started doing today.
I got a text the other day, actually.
I signed up.
I'm just not that person. Maybe there's something else I can do. I just don't know. Maybe we'll figure it out. We'll see.
There always is.
There always is.
Always.
So I guess I'm gonna let you go back to your idyllic life of having a girlfriend or fiance that actually tolerates you.
Yeah, you know what? She deserves an award.
She really does. I feel like
it's not a
I feel
no
like
exaggeration.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that's due her.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for coming on once again, Lyman. And I'm sorry about your finger, which I don't know if you told everybody what happened. But...
Oh, I didn't. But I was doing nerd things and something was falling. And reflexively, I went to try to grab it because it looked small and light, but it wasn't. And so it pulled my finger out of the socket at the knuckle closest to your hand. And then I was like, and I took a second. I grabbed it and I like my finger and took a second because I was like, I don't even want to look at this because it felt really bad. It felt really bad. Skip it. If anyone offers you that, skip it real bad. And then I was like, it had a little extra bump in front of the knuckle. And so I was like, all right. And I like counted to 3, took a deep breath and pulled it. And it made the worst pop ever.
Yep.
And thankfully, so far, it went back in. I can move it.
It's going to swell like a motherfucker.
It didn't swell as much as I thought it would. Like, I've never dislocated that finger.
There's not that much fluid around there. I mean, I dislocated my knee and it fucking fluid just all over the fucking place.
Well, the knee is basically sitting on a liquid cushion.
Yeah, so that's great. I'm glad that's something.
Your kneecap, your patella is living the dream.
Yeah, I don't know what the fuck that dream is, but it's not one
it lives on your body's natural waterbed.
Okay, I'm gonna need you not to make that analogy again.
I think you need me to always make that analogy.
I don't think it's gonna be necessary anymore, sir. Anyway, in my teeth, $3,500 work is still proceeding. Waiting for the 3 crowns to come back, and then I go get the root canal and 2 other crowns. That's exciting. That's excitement.
Scale of 1 to 10, how bad is a root canal?
What?
Scale of 1 to 10, how bad is a root canal?
How bad it is?
Bad, yes.
Oh, it's not.
The opposite of good.
Oh, root canal, I don't care. It doesn't really hurt. I'm so used to people sticking dentist and shit in my mouth. I don't even care anymore. It's fine.
No?
No.
I fucking hate them.
I know. Well,
I think everyone does. You're weird if you like them.
I don't like them, but I don't like sitting there. It's my jaw being open the whole time is what fucks with me.
Like the hinge gets all like sore and everything?
Yeah, that's why I was like, why did I schedule this interview the same day that I was getting teeth work? I don't know.
Secret nihilist, masochist?
Yeah, that's masochism going on there.
Yeah, masochism. Do it.
Do it.
Do it.
All right, we're going to end it there. So, Lyman, thanks for coming on. Thanks for Mr. Vitale for coming on.
Indeed.
And thank y'all, comrades, for showing up once again. And until next time, y'all take it easy now, okay?
Bye-bye.